Have you ever heard of a Donald Duck episode that should never have been seen? Some say the tape is cursed, and that Donald changes shape before your eyes. I know it sounds like an internet story, the kind that circulates on obscure forums. But what I'm going to tell you today isn't just another creepypasta. It's a real investigation into something Disney would rather you never find out about. Before we begin, answer me one question. Would you be willing to watch something knowing it could completely change your perception of one of childhood's most beloved characters? Because after what you're about to hear today, you may never see Donald the same way again. To understand this story, we need to go back in time. We're talking about Disney's golden years, the 1940s and 1950s, when Walt Disney was building his empire of dreams. It was a different time, when animators worked late into the night, smoking cigarettes and creating magic frame by frame. But not everything was rosy at the studio. Animators faced impossible deadlines, low pay, and constant pressure to deliver. Walt Disney was known for being an obsessive perfectionist, and this created enormous tensions among the creative team. During this period, hundreds of black and white animated films were produced. Experimental episodes, animation tests, and sequences that never reached the public. Disney's archive was enormous, full of material that never saw the light of day. But here's the problem. Several of these tapes simply disappeared from the official archive. They weren't officially destroyed. There's no record of their disposal. They just disappeared, as if someone had deliberately removed certain materials from the archives. Older employees, when questioned years later, spoke of a turbulent period when a disgruntled animator had hidden messages in their work. Strange symbols drawn in the backgrounds, slightly distorted facial expressions on the characters, small anomalies that would have gone unnoticed by the censors of the time. This animator, whose name has never been officially revealed, reportedly worked specifically on Donald Duck episodes. And according to inside rumors, he had a disturbing obsession with the character. I first heard about the Forbidden Donald from a Disney memorabilia collector named Marcus Chen from San Francisco. Marcus has been collecting rare VHS tapes for over 30 years, frequents flea markets, and has contacts all over the world. In 2018, Marcus told me he'd purchased a VHS tape at a flea market in rural California. The cover was worn, with no official Disney identification, just a handwritten label, Donald Lost Episode. The seller, a man in his 70s, said the tape belonged to his father, who had worked as a sound technician in a Los Angeles studio in the 1950s. He explained that his father would record episodes directly from television during the early hours of the morning, when reruns of old cartoons were on. Marcus took the tape home and played it. At first, everything seemed normal. It was a short episode about 8 minutes long in black and white with the typical animation of the time. Donald was at home trying to fix an old radio. But at exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, something changed. Donald stopped moving for a few frames. When he started moving again, his eyes were completely empty. Not black, but empty like holes in the animation. Marcus paused, rewound, and watched it again. This time, he noticed something even stranger. Donald's beak was slightly crooked, as if it had been broken, and there was something different about his voice. It was still the character's signature voice, but there was a barely perceptible distortion, a deeper tone underneath. The collector watched the entire episode twice more that day, and each time I swore the animation was slightly different from the last, as if the tape itself were changing. On the third viewing, Marcus noticed something that made him pause immediately. In the final frames, when Donald smiled at the camera, you could see small, sharp teeth inside his beak. Intrigued and frightened, Marcus decided to digitize the tape and sent the file to other collectors. But when he tried to play the digital file, it was corrupted. Only the original VHS tape worked. Other similar reports began to surface on specialized forums. A New York collector reported finding an identical ribbon in a Brooklyn thrift store. Another, from Chicago, purchased a version at an online heirloom auction. They all described the same anomalies: empty eyes, a crooked beak, sharp teeth. And they all reported the same impossible phenomenon. The tape changed with each viewing. Sarah McDonald, a Seattle film restorer, was one of the few people able to photographically document the changes. She captured frames from the tape in different reproductions, and the differences were clear. The Donald literally transformed from one viewing to the next. In one of the last photos Sarah took, Donald's face was completely deformed. The skin looked peeled off, his beak was split in half, and his eyes were just dark sockets that seemed to move even in the still image. Sarah refused to watch the tape again after this discovery. What made the Forbidden Donald even more disturbing was not just the visual anomalies, but the psychological impact it had on viewers. Dr. Robert Hayes, a psychologist specializing in audiovisual trauma at Stanford University, was intrigued when he heard about the reports. He obtained a copy of the tape through Marcus and watched it in his lab, using brainwave monitoring equipment. The results were alarming. During the normal parts of the episode, Hayes's brain activity was typical of someone watching a regular animation. But the moment the distortions appeared, his neurological patterns changed dramatically. It was as if his brain was processing something it couldn't fully comprehend. Hayes reported constant nightmares after the experience. Every night for weeks, he dreamed of Donald's laugh, but distorted, echoing as if coming from a deep well. In his dreams, the duck appeared in his house, but it was no longer a cartoon character. It was something real, organic, yet retaining the grotesque characteristics of the cartoon. The psychologist wasn't the only one to report nightmares. Virtually everyone who watched the tape developed similar patterns of disturbed sleep. The dreams were always similar. Donald appeared in familiar surroundings, but progressively transformed into something monstrous. Lisa Hartman, one of the viewers, described dreams in which Donald visited her in her kitchen. He started out normal, but gradually his skin began to tear, revealing something dark underneath. The character's laugh transformed into a guttural, almost animalistic sound. But the effects weren't limited to dreams. Several people reported strange auditory experiences after watching the tape. Sounds of duck footsteps in empty houses, distorted laughter coming from switched-off TVs, the sounds of beaks tapping on windows in the wee hours. Jennifer Wu of Portland swore she heard Donald's voice calling her name outside her home at 3 a.m. When she looked out the window, no one was there, but she found marks on the glass that resembled claw scratches. Most disturbing were the reports of presences. Several people described feeling watched after watching the tape, especially when they were alone. A specific feeling that there was something duck-like lurking in their homes. Tom Bradley, a computer technician from Boston, installed security cameras in his home after watching the tape because he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The cameras never captured anything visible, but they frequently recorded audible disturbances. Knocks, scratches, and occasionally, something that sounded like muffled laughter. As more people watched and reported similar experiences, theories began to emerge to explain the phenomenon. The most common explanation was that the tapes were simply deteriorating, creating random distortions in the image. But this theory did not explain why the distortions were consistent across different copies, nor why they changed in specific ways with each viewing. Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychoacoustics expert at UCLA, proposed a more sinister theory. After analyzing the audio from the tape, she discovered very specific subliminal frequencies, sounds below the threshold of conscious perception but still processed by the brain. These frequencies weren't accidental. They followed patterns used in psychological experiments in the 1940s and 1950s, when scientists tested methods of subliminal influence. During the Cold War, both Americans and Soviets experimented with audiovisual propaganda capable of affecting the subconscious. Foster discovered that the frequencies on Donald's tape specifically followed patterns developed by Dr. Ernst Weber, a German psychologist who worked for the American government after World War II. Weber studied how specific sounds could induce states of anxiety and suggestibility. Foster's theory was that the Forbidden Donald was not an ordinary animated film corrupted by time, but a deliberate psychological experiment disguised as children's entertainment. But why use Donald? The answer may lie in the character's very nature. Donald Duck has always been the most human of Disney characters. Temperamental, frustrated, with obvious flaws. This made him more relatable, more capable of creating deep emotional connections with the audience. A beloved character would be the perfect vehicle for a subliminal experiment. People would lower their natural defenses, allowing the manipulative frequencies to have maximum effect. Dr. Mitchell Barnes, an animation historian at the University of Chicago, discovered documents suggesting that Disney collaborated with government programs during the 1940s and 1950s. Officially, this collaboration produced educational and wartime propaganda films. But Barnes found vague references to experimental projects of psychological influence through entertainment media. One particularly disturbing document, dated 1953, mentioned tests with animated characters modified for the induction of altered states of consciousness. The document was heavily redacted, but specifically mentioned experiments with Donald Duck material. Barnes theorizes that the Forbidden Donald was the result of one such experiment, a test to see if children's cartoons could be used as vehicles for mind control. When the effects proved too extreme, the project was canceled, and the tapes were supposedly destroyed. But some survived, hidden by employees or lost in the archive. And decades later, they began to reappear on the collector's market. Of all the copies of The Forbidden Donald that have been found, some were more extreme than others. Most caused only the psychological effects I mentioned. but there are reports of versions that were different. Kevin Morrison, a rare film collector from Austin, Texas, claims to have found what he calls the complete version of the tape. According to Morrison, his copy was approximately 12 minutes long, 4 minutes longer than other known versions. Morrison described how, in the extra minutes, Donald underwent a literal transformation. These weren't just subtle distortions. It was a complete, grotesque metamorphosis. Then, Donald looked directly at the camera and began clawing at his own face. His skin ripped like paper, revealing something dark beneath. His beak opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth spiraling down into his throat. But most disturbingly, according to Morrison, Donald retained his distinctive voice throughout the transformation. He continued speaking in his familiar tone, but the words were incomprehensible, as if he were speaking an ancient, evil language. Morrison made the mistake of pausing the tape during this sequence to examine individual frames. He discovered something that astonished him. When paused at certain points, human faces could be seen superimposed on the animation. Distorted faces, with expressions of absolute terror, as if real people were trapped inside the animation. One of the faces, Morrison swore, was that of a child. A girl of about 8 years old, her eyes wide with fear, her mouth open in a silent scream. The face appeared for only a few frames, superimposed on the transformed Donald's chest. Distraught, Morrison tried to digitize this specific portion of the tape, but the equipment malfunctioned when it reached these frames. The images became corrupted, filled with static, as if something were interfering with the capture process. He also reported that after pausing the tape during these sequences, his TV began to malfunction. Even with the tape removed and the TV turned off, the screen would occasionally flicker briefly, showing frames of the distorted animation. Morrison eventually disposed of the tape, selling it to an unidentified collector through an online auction. He declined to reveal who bought it, saying only that some things aren't meant to be owned for long. The most disturbing account of The Forbidden Donald came from Daniel Kowalski, a retired Detroit projectionist who worked with rare films. In 2019, Kowalski hosted a private screening of the film for a small group of vintage animation enthusiasts. The screening took place in the basement of his home, which he had converted into a small movie theater. 6 people were in attendance, including Kowalski and his wife, Martha. According to survivors' accounts, and yes, I use the word survivors deliberately, the projection began normally. Kowalski's version appeared to be one of the mildest ones, with only basic visual distortions. But something changed during the screening. Around minute 6, the tape began playing content that hadn't been there before. Entirely new scenes, longer and more extreme than anything previously reported. The Donald on the screen was no longer just distorted. He had transformed into something else entirely, a creature that vaguely retained the form of a duck, but was clearly something much more ancient and malevolent. The creature spoke directly to the audience, addressing each person by name. Kowalski swore the thing on the screen was looking specifically at each of them, making individual eye contact. But the most terrifying thing happened when Martha Kowalski screamed and pointed to the corner of the room. According to the others present, There was a shadow moving on the wall, a shadow that exactly matched the silhouette of the creature on the screen. Two of the audience fainted. Others began vomiting uncontrollably. Daniel Kowalski tried to turn off the projector, but it wouldn't respond. The tape continued to play for another 20 minutes, showing increasingly disturbing scenes. When it finally finished, the group discovered it was 4:33 a.m. The screening had started at 9 p.m., but the tape was only 8 minutes long. 7 hours had passed, but no one could remember what happened during most of that time. In the following days, 3 of the spectators were hospitalized with severe psychotic symptoms. They constantly repeated the same phrase, "He doesn't want to be funny anymore." They spoke in different languages, including ones they didn't understand. Martha Kowalski never fully recovered. She developed an extreme phobia of ducks, not just Donald Duck, but any depiction of ducks. She couldn't even look at pictures of them without having panic attacks. A week after the screening, Daniel Kowalski disappeared. His wife said he had mentioned needing to return something, but didn't specify what. He left home early that evening and never returned. The only thing they found in their basement was the VHS tape, placed carefully in the center of the screening room. The cover was scratched with what looked like claws, and a new label was stuck to it. The tag simply read, "He doesn't want to be funny anymore." So what exactly is the Forbidden Donald? A psychological experiment gone wrong? A genuinely cursed tape? The product of a disturbed mind at work at Disney Studios decades ago? The truth is, no one knows for sure. Theories range from scientific to paranormal explanations, but none can fully explain all the reported phenomena. What we do know is that these tapes exist. They circulate on the black market among collectors, being sold and bought by people who either don't believe the stories or are attracted precisely by the danger they pose. Disney has never officially commented on the Forbidden Donald, but inside sources suggest the company is aware of the rumors. There is a dedicated team within Disney that works to acquire and retire these tapes whenever they appear on the market. But they couldn't find them all. Conservative estimates suggest there are still at least 24 of these tapes circulating around the world. Some may be stored in private collections, others may be in dusty basements, waiting to be discovered by unsuspecting onlookers. And here's the most disturbing part. According to some collectors, the tapes are being reproduced. Not physically, of course, but the content is appearing in new formats. Some people have reported finding the Forbidden Donald on pirated DVDs, corrupted digital files, and even in illegal streams of old cartoons. It's as if the content itself has a life of its own, finding ways to spread independently of the original physical medium. Marcus Chun, the collector who first told me about the tape, disappeared in 2021. His home was found empty but tidy, as if he had left voluntarily. The only thing out of place was his home theater system, which was on and playing static on a loop. On the floor next to the TV, they found a handwritten note. "I understand everything now. He never wanted to be just a drawing." The question remains, how many of these tapes still exist? Where are they? And most importantly, would you recognize one if you found one? Because perhaps at this very moment, in some lost thrift store, some forgotten flea market, or the basement of an abandoned house, an unmarked VHS tape is waiting. A tape with a handwritten label that simply reads, Donald Lost Episode. And if you find it, if you decide to take it home and reproduce it out of curiosity, remember what I said today. Remember the stories, the disappearances, the impossible transformations. Because no one knows how many of these tapes are still out there. But whoever found one was never the same again. Final intriguing question. Now tell me, if you found this tape today, knowing everything you just heard, would you have the courage to watch it? Or is the mystery safer when it remains unsolved? Call to action. If this story intrigued you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more investigations into urban mysteries and dark legends that the mainstream media prefers to ignore. And if you've heard of the Forbidden Donald, or have a similar experience to share, leave it in the comments. But be careful what you decide to reveal. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. Share this video, but remember, you're helping spread a story that perhaps should remain buried. The choice is yours.